Well, hello again, and welcome to the podcast. I recently recorded a podcast with Sarah Corliss she's in Australia. I'm in France. And we were chatting before and after doing the recording. And one of the things we were just chatting about was COVID and sort of what we were doing when it all hit, how it changed what we do. And I thought it was worth maybe having a chat about all that and just sharing my story for what it's worth. And it does link in with the podcast as I record this is currently live, which is my behind the scenes blog 3, or it should be podcast 3 really, but anyway, whatever, in Mozambique, which, as I've shared, was not the most enjoyable project I've ever done. And that kind of dovetailed into all of the COVID lockdowns, flights getting cancelled, countries closing borders, all this kind of stuff. So it just seems appropriate. And I'm going to put this recording between that one and the one with Sarah. So if you're listening to this before the 31st of March, 2023, then you'll have to wait for my chat with Sarah. If you're listening afterwards, you can go straight to it. So it's up to you. So, I guess just to explain a little bit of background, in 2019, I'm not going to go into lots of detail, but basically I had been thinking about leaving Australia and moving back to Europe to be close to people in England. I didn't particularly want to live in the UK again, but I do enjoy travel. I enjoy history as well as wildlife and different cultures. And obviously within Europe, you can get access to a massive variety by just flying for a few hours, whereas you fly for a few hours in Australia and you're still in Australia mostly, and things are pretty much the same. Not to say that I don't love Australia still, I certainly do. And when I moved to Australia, my intention was to stay there for the rest of my life, but things changed. So, yeah, I'm still waiting for my life to stop unfolding in ways I hadn't quite expected. So, in 2019, I'd reached a point where my plan A really hadn't worked out at all. And I was basically running out of money, decided I had to sell my home and decided to just bring forward my plans to go to Europe. And that was pretty much what I did. But because things had been pretty stressful for at least 18 months before I left Australia, and probably nearer 2 years, I decided that rather than just leave Australia and move to Europe, I would take some time out, do what I love doing, which is photographing wildlife, and get involved in a few volunteer projects. And I ended up volunteering with 4. And around Christmas, I caught up with Rufano, who is a friend of mine in Tanzania, who was a guide when I climbed Kilimanjaro in 2017. And we'd stayed in contact after that. And basically, I spent Christmas with him, and we were out camping in Tanzania at a little kind of place that a lot of the locals go to, a little lake full of fish that nibble at you when you're swimming in the water. So that was the plan. And I've spoken in other podcasts about my experiences with volunteering in different projects. So the sequence basically was to go to Namibia first, where I spent a couple of weeks with the HRA, who is one of the charities or projects that I'm supporting through my fine art sales. And then I had the Christmas break and went to Tanzania and actually was at Zanzibar for New Year's, just really killing a couple of weeks, to be honest, because most projects had shut down and I couldn't do any volunteering over Christmas, at least not the sort of wildlife projects that I was interested in getting involved with. Then in the January, I was in South Africa at a project there. Had a week between finishing in South Africa and volunteering at Nakavango in Zimbabwe. So flew across to Namibia and did an overland trip across Botswana. So it was, this was kind of a trip of a lifetime, pretty much. It's not what I do every year, but I thought because things have been so tough, I would just really take some time out. There was cash in the bank, and I thought I would just spend some of it doing what I love doing. So that was it. When I was in Zimbabwe, in February 2020. Obviously, at that point, but at that point, COVID was becoming a bigger issue than it had been. It had been, my experience of it anyway, was that in late 2019, it was very much a background thing. It was, we'd had these kind of things happen before, and they hadn't really turned into anything. And it was becoming more obvious while I was in Zimbabwe that something bigger was going on, but it was still a bit of a joke. Definitely when I got to Mozambique, it was definitely something that was on the horizon, and something, in fact, the person who picked me up from the airport, we were just talking about it, and we were still trying to understand it, bearing in mind I've been travelling for a few months, and to me it just sounded like bad flu. So obviously then the lockdowns began to happen, and I was in Mozambique at the time, and I was just in a very odd position because I've got dual nationality. I'm British and Australian, so I have two passports, so I can live in either country, but I didn't actually have a home anywhere because I'd sold my flat, my unit in Sydney, and my intention was once I'd finished these projects, Mozambique being the last one, I would go to France, just spend a few weeks with some people I knew who lived in France, and kind of use where they were as a bit of a base to take a look around, and then try and get an offer in on a place by the end of July was the plan, because that way I had 4 months for the house sale to go through, which is what it takes here in France, plus another month in hand before the end of 2020, which was when the Brexit cut-off happened, and I was doing this on my British passport. So after, once we got to January 2021, then Britain was pretty much fully out of the EU, and to come and live in any EU country was more complicated. So that was the plan. And so the final week I was in Mozambique, it began to get more obvious that things were happening fast. And I had a phone call from the lady who was organising the Mozambique trip, because she was away. She'd gone away to do something else while we were there. Basically to say that she'd heard that South Africa was going to close its airspace, and I really needed to think about getting out of Mozambique. So I'd had a lady in Melbourne organising all my travel for me. She was doing the travel for one of the projects, but because I was jumping around all over the shop, I asked her, and she was quite happy to organise the rest of my travel for me. But with her being in Melbourne, me being in Mozambique at the time, so there's a few hours time difference, and having to move very fast because flights were getting cancelled all the time. It's sort of a bit difficult to know exactly what was going on. I was just jumping in and booking flights. So I'd been in contact with these people in France and basically said to them, look, it looks like things are closing down. So is it okay if I come a week earlier than planned? And I'm now just trying to get myself out of Mozambique. And if it's okay, I'll come and stay with you as planned, and we'll go from there. And they were happy with that. And also, because I didn't have a home at that point, there was no obvious place to go in that sense. And a friend in Ireland had also offered me a bed if I needed one, if I got stuck anywhere. So that was kind of my fallback. But I was trying to stick to the original plan as much as possible. So I got myself, so it was a day to get from where I was to Maputo. I had to get a little internal flight, but that was a day. And then there aren't that many international flights, so certainly not in that situation from Maputo. I think it was something like 4 or 5 a day. And they stopped sort of in the afternoon, mid-afternoon, normally about 4, I think was the latest. So by the time I got into Maputo from where I was on the coast, there weren't any more international flights that day. So I booked myself on another one. And I was trying to basically get to Bordeaux in southwest France, and had got this flight. And I decided to avoid Johannesburg. I mean, I've been in and out of Johannesburg airport so many times in the intervening months. I knew it really well. But I thought I'd try and go as direct as I could. So I had a flight from Maputo to Angola to Portugal and then to Bordeaux, which seemed, slightly complicated, but got me there. And I stayed in this hotel in Maputo, got them to drop me off at the airport, and went to check in for my flight. And I'd got there early, which I tend to do anyway, just in case there are problems getting to the airport. So I find air travel can be a bit stressful, so I leave lots and lots of time just to allow myself to relax. And anyway, as I was queuing to check in for this flight to Angola, a lot of people were getting turned away at the check-in desk. So, I stayed in line. It was quite a long, slow process. And when I finally got to the desk, they wouldn't check me in because my connecting flight from Angola up to Portugal had been cancelled. So I'm then kind of wondering what to do, and we were directed round to an office, but unfortunately everyone was speaking Portuguese, which is what they speak in Mozambique, and I don't speak Portuguese, so every now and again I'd ask someone to tell me what was going on. But the bottom line seemed to be that this airline, and I've forgotten which one I was on, didn't have flights. They were offering to do all sorts of things, but really not doing anything at all. And I hung around, I think, for around 2 hours, getting more and more frustrated because I just wanted to get out. And as much as I don't want to be disrespectful to Mozambique, as I said in the last podcast, it's one of the poorest countries in the world. And to me, it didn't seem like really the best place to get stuck, given what was going on and not really knowing what was going to happen in the next few days. So anyway, in the end, it was getting into the evening. It was starting to get dark. Nobody seemed to be really doing anything useful at the little office I was in with a lot of other people trying to get out of Maputo. So I just walked upstairs to the cafe at the airport, which was the only place that seemed to have Wi-Fi that I could access. Went online and booked myself onto a flight the following day via Johannesburg. So I had to fly to Johannesburg, then the Middle East, and then on to Paris. And I thought, well, I'll go to Paris because trying to get to Bordeaux was starting to look increasingly unlikely. Just the way that flights were just dropping. They just seemed to be cancelling them all the time. So having done that, I then got myself back to the hotel that I'd been in previous night. And I really didn't have much to do. And as luck would have it, a friend of mine who we met at Sydney Airport a few years ago. And as I say, I tend to get to airports quite early. I go through all the passport control and all of that stuff. And then I'm in the big shopping centre that passes as the airport these days. And I'll go and get something to eat. And on this particular occasion, and I can't remember where I was going. It might have been India, but I'm really not sure. And I sat down at this little restaurant-y thing at Sydney Airport, at the international airport, next to the glass, so I could just look outside at what was going on. And this guy came and sat next to me and had a Nikon camera. So we just started chatting, and he's a French guy, and we were just chatting about his camera and photography and all that. And then we obviously, at some point, we must have exchanged Instagram accounts. And off we went, and that was it. We sort of stayed very loosely in touch through Instagram, and I think I might have posted something on Facebook just to say I was having some dramas getting out of Mozambique, and he got in touch with me, and I didn't realise, but he is involved in the tourist industry in France, and he was looking up flights for me to just make sure the flights I'd booked were still live. So that was all good, and I was then asking him about whether or not I could get into France, because it wasn't entirely clear to me whether I could get into France as an EU citizen, as in at that stage, Britain being technically in the EU. I was a European citizen at that point, but I was not a European resident. I didn't know if that would make a difference. So he had been trying to contact someone in the French government to clarify for me, which I just thought was amazing. And in the meantime, I'd been jumping online and having a look, and these people that I was staying with had come back and said to me that, yeah, it's all good to stay, but you may not be able to get into France. So ultimately, I went to the Eurostar website, and it became clear that, at least as far as I could work out, with my passport, I would be okay getting in. So decided to go for it. Then had the most horrendous day because my flight wasn't till around 3 o'clock. And I'm one of these people who really hates hanging around. I like to be doing something. And if things are going wrong, I like to be taking action to remedy it. I'm one of the worst people for sitting around and doing nothing when things are kind of going, or that sort of situation where things can easily go wrong. Because I couldn't book an alternative flight. For a start, there wasn't one that day. And secondly, I would have had to pay for it up front. And as it eventuated, I lost around $5,000 in the end. That's Aussie dollars, with all the flights and things that got cancelled, and then insurances were refusing to pay and all this sort of stuff. So finally, the following day, got to the airport in the afternoon after pretty much wanting to curl up in a little ball in the hotel room. And all I did was play solitaire on my computer for hours just to kill time. And anyway, got dropped off at the airport. Everything looked good, and managed to check in this time for the flight. Although the guy who was checking me in decided my British passport wasn't valid for travel to Europe, and I told me it was until the end of 2020. And eventually went off to his supervisor, and they let me check in. But that, just another thing. All the shops in the airport were closed, of course. Not that there are a lot. Maputo is quite a new-ish, it's quite a modern-ish airport. It's just small. It's a nice little airport. And we had an announcement. I think the flight was leaving around 4, or due to leave at around 4:30. We were due to board at 4. And I had a 3-hour window once I got to Johannesburg to get my ongoing flight, but which I booked or checked in all the way through to Paris, but I did not have my boarding cards for the 2 flights. So I was okay for Maputo to Johannesburg, but Johannesburg to, honestly, I can't even remember where I went in the Middle East. From there to the Middle East and Middle East to Paris, I did not have those 2 boarding cards. So anyway, we kind of, there's a little group of us, we're the only people flying, so we're just waiting. And a few minutes before we were due to start boarding, there was an announcement to say our flight was delayed, and then there was nothing. And to cut that long story short, after a while we saw this aircraft come in and land and taxi round to where the aerobridges were on our part of the airport, but it had no markings on it at all. It was just white. So I assumed it was an aircraft that had been hired to cover for one of their aircraft, which was supposed to be doing the flight, but for whatever reason wasn't available. And the aerobridge we were supposed to use, so the gate we were supposed to use to board, they were doing a lot of welding work on the aerobridge, and nobody was telling us what was going on. And hours started to go by, and several people were asking. I asked a couple of times what was going on, and the person we'd asked to say they'd go and find out, they'd go away and not come back. And it was getting ridiculous. And I'm very conscious of this 3-hour window getting eaten up. So in the end, I pretty much led a revolt of angry passengers saying, the aircraft's there. We can't use this gate. Stick us on another gate and we'll get down onto the tarmac and just go. But I said, I'm not missing my flights back to Europe. And eventually that is what happened. We got on the aircraft. We sat around for a little bit once we were in the aircraft, but we did finally leave. And once we got to Johannesburg, now I remembered with these flights, with some flights into Johannesburg, you park away from the terminal and you get a bus round to the terminal, which of course takes a bit longer than taxiing straight up to the terminal and using an aerobridge to get into the terminal. So I realised we were going to have that little drama. A few people had told the aircrew, the stewardesses, that we only had a few minutes to make connecting flights, and they said they'd arrange something. When we landed, I couldn't see any help at all, so I just jumped on the bus. As it turned out, a vehicle had been arranged for us, and a couple of guys were shouting at me, but I didn't hear them. So had this horrible drive all the way around Johannesburg Airport to the terminal. And then I was trying to remember where the transit lounge was, the transit check-in for this particular airline. And I remember going past it a couple of times, but I had been into that terminal because I did a couple of domestic flights, not just transit flights, when I'd been traveling around in the previous few months. So I couldn't remember if the desk was in the main airport or in just the transit area. So, and I only had minutes, so I just picked transit and went for it. And there's a little passport control sort of check place as you go through the transit area in Johannesburg Airport. And this family were there, and they could see me rushing. And the lady there asked if I was trying to get a connection, and I said yes. And it turned out she'd actually missed hers, so they were, because of this delay at Maputo, they'd missed their flight. So hopefully they got straightened out. And anyway, I basically just ran, and sure enough, the desk was there. I ran up to the desk, got my boarding cards for the next two flights so I could get to Paris, and asked the girls how long they were going to be around for, and they said, well, we're just leaving. So I literally just made that connection. So that was a relief. And I did ask if my bag would be going through to Paris, and they said yes. And I thought, well, if it doesn't get to Paris, they're miles away. They're in Johannesburg, so not much I can do about it. Anyway, managed to get my flights. I honestly now can't remember which airport I was in the Middle East, but it was where I just thought it was very strange because every other seat had this "Do Not Sit" sign on it, and I hadn't quite twigged what that was all about. But obviously, it was the social distancing kicking in. I didn't have a mask at that point, and some people on the flights were wearing masks. In fact, they had been when I was in Mozambique, but this was all very new. And these regulations were just starting to come in. So got to Paris, which was great. Got to the machine, the passport machine, and happily it let me through. So I was really pleased because I then felt that the worst part was over, and at least I was in the right country, although I was still a fair old distance away from where I needed to be. And Bordeaux, if you don't know, is a few hundred k's southwest of Paris. So driving, it's roughly 5-6 hours. The train is faster. It's about 2.5 hours on the express train. However, with all the lockdown, and there'd been a full lockdown from midday the day before in Paris. So I was kind of listening to this and wondering if I'd even be able to get in. This was another concern. However, obviously I was in at that point. And walking through Charles de Gaulle Airport, everything is closed. There are no booths open, no rental cars, nothing. I walked to the railway station, and if you're not familiar with Charles de Gaulle, there's you go from the arrivals through to where the railway station is. There's also a big hotel there. That was completely dark, just completely shut down. I got to the railway station, nothing going down to Bordeaux that night, and there were a couple of trains due the following morning, but I was told that the trains were being cancelled at fairly short notice, so I could buy a ticket for one, but there was no guarantee it would actually run the following day. And talking to this guy, in fact, I talked to a few people, and this couple had sort of wandered off, and I spoke to this guy, and he said his friend had a taxi and they would take me down to Bordeaux. And of course, I'm thinking, well, hang on, that's got to be a 6-hour drive. So what's that going to cost me? And they quoted me 900 and something euros. And then I said, well, okay, I've got to go a little bit further, actually. So that ended up being over 1,000 euros. So that is easily the most expensive taxi fare I've ever had. I looked around for this couple who were going to Bordeaux, but they'd gone because I thought, maybe they'd be happy to split the fare. And then it's, only three-figure tax fare, not a 4-figure. Anyway, they'd gone, and I just thought, well, I've got a solution here. It's not particularly elegant, but it'll get me down there. And right now, I just don't seem to have any options. So just told the guy, okay, let's go for it. In the meantime, I'm sending a message to this couple that I'm staying with to say, look, tell them what's going on. I hadn't had a reply back, and I'm not sure that, I think my phone wasn't working properly on my Australian SIM card wasn't working, and I'm not sure if the messages were getting through at that point. Anyway, the guy went off to get his taxi. His mate was with me. We went upstairs and we were actually at the end of the taxi rank, the sort of front end of the taxi rank, and there were no taxis and loads of people who'd obviously come off this flight or other flights, waiting for taxis that just weren't appearing. So I began to feel I'd probably made the right decision, even though it was, definitely not my first choice to do all of that in a taxi. Anyway, the guy turned up in this Mercedes taxi van thing and put my gear in and off we went. I had to hotspot off his phone because it was the only way I could get a connection and let these people know that I was on my way down, but let them know what was going on. It was likely to be about 3 a.m. when I rocked up. And got this extraordinary email from them basically saying that the husband was 70 years old, had been ill and blah, 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 blah. Could I find somewhere else to stay? And I was thinking, you've got to be kidding me. I've just been through this nightmare getting out of Mozambique. And you're saying yes all the way along when I had an alternative because I could have easily got a flight to Cork and stayed with my friend there. But now that I'm actually in Paris, I'm getting told this. So I counted to quite a large number and then simply messaged back to say, well, I'm rather committed at this point. So, and then I got an email, whatever it was, text saying, okay, we'll see you, whatever. But honestly, though, it was... Yeah, I will say that when you are in a difficult situation and people have offered to back you up, and then when you're absolutely committed and you kind of fought through to get there, and then you get that was not something that I felt particularly excited about. As far as I was concerned, that pretty much killed the friendship. I'll be honest about that because I would never do that to anybody else. But anyway, that's me. And there you go. So I did finally get down to them. But as we were leaving Paris, I realised I really needed to go to the bathroom with all of that excitement and asked the guy if he could pull in somewhere. And, so we pulled into this little service station. And I jumped out, went to the bathroom. And as I'm walking in, I'm thinking, hang on, I have not got any idea who this guy is. And all my gear's in his van. I've got thousands of dollars worth of camera gear. I've got thousands of photographs. I've got a book that I'd been writing about sales stuff, which I was going to put on Amazon. And, my clothes, everything that's got to last me until the stuff that was currently was on its way. In fact, it was in storage at that point in the UK, I believe. It had gone by ship from Sydney and had arrived in the UK in January because I got an email. And had no idea who this guy was. Didn't even have the rego of the vehicle, but I just thought, well, I really got to go. So I sort of went in, was shortest possible time, and then nipped out, and happily he was still there. And that was it. Got down to these people at 3 a.m. So that really, I feel like I waffled on a bit, but that was my COVID story. In terms of any changes it made, probably not a lot, if I'm totally honest. I had to do a lot of stuff in total lockdown. Because in France, we had full lockdown when I arrived. Then we had periods of lockdown. In fact, when I moved into my house, which was at the end of November 2020, after having basically a crazy 10-day period in July where I was rushing around looking at properties because I'd lost so many months because of the lockdowns and the travel restrictions. I don't know France particularly well at all. So anyway, luckily found this property and got in before the Brexit cutoff, and had to do a lot of like my actual moving in, ordering furniture, all of that stuff was done completely online because all of the shops were closed and I couldn't do all of the normal stuff. My gear from Australia arrived just before Christmas 2020. So the cutoff was 31st of December. So I just snuck into that deadline as well. I think one of the things I did look at was how you can use photography as a way of connecting with nature, because a lot of us were isolated in COVID. I just felt that photography is a great thing, and this is one of the reasons I love it. First of all, if you are even remotely interested in doing something creative, it's a really good medium to just experiment with, and you can do it indoors. If you couldn't even get out, you could do it indoors. So I did put together some COVID projects for people to do if they wanted to. It was just a free download. And the other thing was just connecting with nature, which, fully aligned with what I'm doing with Graham Elliott photography and the connection to wildlife and nature. I just think if you are stressed out, and we've all had situations where we're really stressing about what's going on, if you can go and connect with nature in some way, it doesn't have to be going out for a walk, although if you can, that's probably the best way of doing it. But just looking at photographs or looking at stuff on TV or whatever it might be, I think just reconnecting with nature is a way of just sort of settling down, centering, to use a phrase. And then you can kind of get out of the panic and the sort of buzzy noise telling you should be doing things. And as I said, that's something that I tend to suffer from a little bit, because I'm not very good at sitting still when things have to be done, and where I'm trying to resolve a situation. I just want it done. And when it doesn't happen instantly, that's something I struggle with. So I'm going to stop talking at this point. That was my COVID story. So I don't know. I don't know if that's helpful. Probably not very. Maybe entertaining. maybe not listening anymore. But there you go. That was the story. And as I say, the next podcast is talking to Sarah, and she has a great story to tell. So I won't say any more about that. I'll say goodbye for now, and I'll speak to you on the next podcast. Bye for now. Oh, and one thing just before you go, please take a look at the 2026 wildlife calendar. That's available now. It's on the website. There's a link below the description of this podcast episode. So please take a look, and I'll speak to you next time. Bye now.